Gotcha.
The Anja Barone is a Rarity 6 hunting horn in Monster Hunter World, is fairly cheap to build with the last upgrade requiring Teostra Main and an Anjanath gem. The weapon model is another one of the beetle instruments, with a creepy looking Anjanath jaw resting underneath along with feathers and a pelt. Getting started with the attributes, the first thing you might notice is that the Anja Barone ties with Desolation's Overture for the highest hunting horn attack value of 882. Additionally, it has the second highest elemental value of 450. So between those two values, Anja Barone should, in theory, deal more damage than any of the other hunting horns as long as you are fighting a monster with a weakness to fire, but I have more to say about that as we go. You see, to balance out that high damage, Anja Barone starts with a negative 20% affinity, it has a very small blue sharpness bar, and no decoration slots. Fortunately, the Anja Barone also does get access to 3 augmentations, and that kind of brings me to my current impression of the weapon. That it's really more of a late game hunting horn, even if you can build it up pretty fast in the early game, and that's because of all the decorations that you need in order to make it useful, as well as being able to augment it. Let's move on to talking about the horn buffs, which we always have to examine to get a full understanding of a hunting horn. Starting out, we have stamina use reduced, which is always kind of an okay buff. It directly increases bow and dual blade output. It will also help anyone using the maximum might skill by keeping stamina full. After that, the next interesting buff to consider is the defense up large buff, which I think is always great for a team since things get pretty hectic and you never really know your teammate's player skill. Finally, we get health recover small and health recover medium plus antidote. To this day, I have not made use of that antidote buff because I wouldn't bring this horn against any of the flying wyverns that can poison you, and that's because they're all resistant against fire damage. The healing buffs themselves are just okay, but they come out very slowly and they're easily interrupted, so it wouldn't really make sense to rely on them in a clutch moment. One of the problems with the Anja Barone's buffs is that it doesn't include a team damage buff, so that the missing team damage has to be considered in Anja Barone's net output when you compare it to a different horn that does have attack up or affinity boost buffs. I guess if you were on a team that could really take full advantage of the stamina buff, you know, like a full team of bow users, then that would probably be ideal. More importantly though, you'll notice Anja Barone doesn't have any good team buffs that would help players with the 2 Elder Dragons who are weak to fire, Vaal Hazak and Kirin. So on paper, you do deal a lot of damage with this horn, but in practice, I found myself still wishing I had the Teostra horn for its unbeatable ailment negation buff. Similarly, since Anja Barone lacks decoration slots, and it basically requires handicraft, I also found myself not being able to build appropriate defense against Tempered Kirin, which was a big problem in group fights as well, where you aren't able to juggle Kirin, and the fight is generally longer than a solo speedrun. Probably my last major criticism of the Anja Barone is that it lacks kind of any moveset combination that would be especially damaging. Maybe its best move is the health recover small, where you can either trade off between the Super Pound's backswing and then the forward swing on note 1, or I guess you could use like a pommel strike on the note 1 until you have enough melodies queued. But yeah, you know, some horns they have like Scout Fly Up or the Sonic Wave, and that allows them to use 3 Super Pounds in a row, and this allows you to stack melodies up easily. Anja Barone doesn't really have anything like that. So we kind of see this pattern with the Anjanath weapons, where at first glance they appear to be very powerful, until you look a little closer and see that the developers have balanced out the weapon's power with attributes that hold it back a little bit, and this is true here with the Anja Barone horn as well. The last thing we should talk about is how you should build for this horn. The first thing I'll recommend is bringing handicraft, because the blue sharpness bar is really small. Other than handicraft, you could actually bring the protective polish skill, since you won't actually get a white sharpness bar from handicraft. Now the problem with protective polish is that's really a late game decoration, so a lot of you might not have that unlocked. Next, I'd say weakness exploit and maximum might are pretty important. You really want them to get past the negative affinity and start building toward positive affinity. Finally, my build gets Rathalos Mastery, which increases elemental damage when landing critical hits. I've also managed to bring Attack Boost 4 and Nergigante Hunger. I end up with a very damaging build that can bring one set of defense gems for something like Effluvial Resist or Paralysis Resist. The downside is I don't have as much health as I'd like to.
NANI?!
Finally, for augmentations, obviously I wouldn't worry about health regen since you have 2 buffs that can already heal for you, which means you should probably focus on attack or affinity. And I'd say in this case, let's go with affinity because you're able to get rid of its base negative affinity if you go that direction. I also forgot to mention that you should consider bringing the Affinity Boost tool, and this will help you reach 100% affinity on the build, but only for a short amount of time. And that's going to have to do it for this weapon guide. I feel that Anja Barone looks very enticing at first thanks to its very high damage, but it's actually pretty closely balanced in comparison to the other horns. And so it's kind of hard to justify taking it rather than the Teostras or Fee for fighting Vaal Hazak or Kirin. Because at its best, I think this could be one of the hardest hitting solo horns, but in multiplayer, you just have better options. I hope you found my guide useful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
Oh my gosh, you guys! I just want to thank y'all so much!